So I'm excited to talk all about your predictions. I want to start with the media sector because look, the Netflix, Paramount, Warner Brothers Discovery is continuing to make news this week. I mean, if we take a step back, what are the trends that you see being the defining themes for 2026 in that sector?
Yeah, I mean, we wake up every morning to new news on that front, especially if we're on the West Coast, right? I think what we're seeing probably is a couple of things, right? First and foremost, it's the need to demonstrate that there's value in new formats, that the bundling and the overall experience is something that the consumers want to pay for. We're starting to see some level of integration of technology. Certainly, it's been happening for some years as far as the recommendations you might have been getting on different services. But the reality is we still haven't seen the requisite probably amount of consolidation to create the amount of value that the users and really the people who are frankly, funding all of this in the content space, really need to get out of these services. And you also have probably too many subscale streaming services that are out there in the market.
Right.
And so, consolidation is inevitable. These latest sets of deals that are, coming down the pike and that are the front page news for every cycle here, are really just an example of the big guys getting together and figuring out like what that looks like and some of the muddling through on the same. But I think we'll see a lot more of it in the year to come.
So you hit on a good point there, which is that consolidation. I mean, from a business perspective, sometimes these businesses have to consolidate to make the scale work. But on the consumer side, I'm curious. I mean, are you seeing fatigue from consumers with respect to having too many subscriptions? And is this ultimately a trend that we're seeing on the ground?
100%. I mean, here's the reality. I'll use my example from last night flying back from Texas. I sometimes don't even know what subscription services I have access to and what passwords I am used for, to get into them. And I'm texting with my wife trying to figure that out.
Right.
But beyond just the practical application point of that, you do have the affordability dynamic, which affects a lot of other decisions too that we'll talk about. I think that affordability piece, especially if you don't have the convenience feature built into it, and people begin to see some lack of value and or the lack of use because they're doing other things, they're working more, they're spending more time with family and friends and the like, especially this time of year, you're going to start seeing decision making, I think, happening there finally. That of course assumes, by the way, that there is pressure on the consumer from a financial point of view, and we are seeing that in the data. Right, the data says that consumers are incurring more debt,
Hmm.
and that they feel less confident about the economy overall. That has to come to a head at some point, I think. Now, that's we're in prediction land here for 26, and so the reality is it doesn't mean it's absolutely going to happen, but I have the sneaky suspicion that eventually, either the financing side and or the consumer side is going to put a lot of pressure on, especially the subscale ones, and say, hey, look, we can't continue to support funding to build these one-off services, and the pressure will be on to consolidate or close or do something along those lines, especially to the extent that they've built original content and have followers of that content. And there are great pieces of content spread across a lot of different providers.
Well, and you hit on a good point, which is that, look, we haven't talked about the social media or the YouTube element of all this being the elephant in the room as it relates to these media companies competing. And I think that could be something as well that continues into 2026 is this idea, how much share does YouTube have of watch time on televisions? I think it's going to be interesting.
Absolutely. And maybe the word to describe that is the traditional media companies are really still playing catch up with some of the techs who've done this already, whether we want to admit that or not. There's the intermediary type of companies you mentioned before who've bridged. They've had one foot in one land, one foot in the other. You're starting to see other deals that are coming through, especially with the AI native companies saying, "Oh, hey, can we produce content more effectively and efficiently, and also can we take cost out too?" Because those are all also pressures that you're seeing from activist investors. Certainly, boards are starting to ask those questions as well. So all those dynamics are going to come into play
Right.
probably pretty quickly here.
What about e-commerce? E-commerce is such an interesting space right now because you get all these AI companies looking to e-commerce and shopping as a way that they could make money. I mean, in 2026, are we going to see all these chatbots integrate with e-commerce more closely, or what do you think is going to define the year?
I think 26 is your gateway, so to say, year for all of that. People are beginning to use it. It's generational, dynamically, right? You're starting to see the youngest generation, Gen Alpha, who are out there the first AI native generation. You're learning everything about the world through the lens of artificial intelligence and agentics. My 12-year-old may be disappointed that I'm not wearing a quarter zip as opposed to the full zip that I have on, for example.
It
But
looks like a quarter zip from here, mind
okay,
you. We
good. We'll
can't
just
see
keep
it.
this at this level.
Yeah.
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 But certainly, I think what we're going to see is 26 is the the lead-in point, around everything that's happening with agentics, driving towards the outlook, probably 5 years out from today, which is a much larger market where agentics probably dominate a lot of the online retail and the online e-commerce that's happening. There are estimates out there, upwards of like $75 trillion economy that could be, mostly driven by AI around commerce, which is incredible when you stop and think about it. But at the same time, if you have literally hundreds of millions of people coming of age
Hmm.
in these AI first generations, that actually makes a ton of sense.
Do you,
The intelligent commerce is also going to affect some of the other players who are out there in the payment space and those interlocks as well. And I think that's going to be something that's really exciting to see across a number of different vendors, and how do they all consolidate?
I wonder if you have clients involved in e-commerce at all that are thinking at all more about physical storefronts. I'm not saying that the trend is going to reverse here in terms of people starting to buy more stuff in stores than online. I think that direction is clear cut. But I see these ads at tech companies now, or and even AI companies. I mean, maybe we're trying to get people back in stores.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it, because there's the experience side of things that people appreciate. I'll give you an example. Not kidding. 15 minutes ago, I got a phone message from a retailer who I'd interacted with and bought something from in another country recently, calling me to wish me a Merry Christmas and asking me when was the next time I was going to be back in that country to buy something again.
Huh.
Um, that's a personalized experience from somebody I probably will never meet again, but that's incredible. And if you stop, but it's meaningful too, right? And if you stop and think about it, if that's meaningful to me, it's probably meaningful to a whole cohort of folks who are in that buying stage of their lives, right? Me down on through to my kids' age, and so that personalization is absolutely, and that relational dynamic is absolutely going to continue to be a driving force, which is the counterbalance to everything just happens online, and I just tell my my bot, my agentic, to go buy something for me. I think there'll be things that your agentics will go do for you, and you don't have to rethink about that shopping list that automatically goes and does things for the commodity type items. But that personalized experience is still going to be really critical for anything above commodity and into that premium space. And that's probably why you're going to have, probably still, a continued shift towards that merging of worlds, if you will, where
Right.
personalization is key, and getting people back in these stores is key too.
Okay, so that's AI on the consumer side. What about AI in the enterprise? How do you see that conversation changing next year?
Yeah, a couple things. I mean, we've all talked about the concept of pilots and proof points, and the real question is going to be, when does ROI come into play, and how do we get value actually of all the things that we've probably spent money on, whether it's enterprise GPTs and LLMs, or if it's just integration within a given SaaS platform. I think you're finally going to see CEOs and boards and CFOs saying, "Wait a second, where's the value proposition? What am I actually seeing from a people point of view? Am I able to reduce headcount? Am I able to get more sales out of my sales team without having to increase the headcount?" The reality is, in a lot of studies out there, I know MIT did one a couple months ago, basically saying the ROI wasn't there in like 90% of deals.
Hmm.
So that has to change. Like that numeric is not supportive of any of the larger deals that we see out there, including the one we woke up to this morning between a couple of big companies that seem to
Right.
continue. So I think there's a reality of ROI, but the good news is we're finally starting to see maybe the engineering that's able to integrate the scaled capabilities on AI into the platforms a lot of people are already using. So whether it's
Right.
CRM, whether it's the controls platforms, whether it's the ERPs themselves, all those things are going to have the AI built directly into it. You're not going to have to rely on the custom experience, the customization that people have been doing really up to this point.
Right.
That's where the value proposition, comes into play, and we get rid of, the AI slop, we'll say, because that's the thing that I think is probably the most frustrating part of the experience people have had with it, which is just not having a consistent experience, or worse, not having something that's necessarily good and useful.
Very quickly, what do you think changes about job descriptions in this era of AI at all these companies? I mean, we hear time and time again about the implementation of AI depends a lot on the people that you have using these tools, implementing these tools. Is 2026 finally the year where some of these new jobs kind of come into focus in terms of how we evaluate whether people are using the tools effectively?
Absolutely. I mean, it's the only way you're going to get ROI. And you made the point about job descriptions. It's going to be accountability for use of AI is going to be a premium. How people are rated and evaluated, it'll absolutely be a part of that process. But it's also part of the intake process too, including what are job titles and what do people do. I mean, maybe you won't have a agentic team leader necessarily, and you have a manager over a bunch of agentics, but you will have people who within the job description, so what HR is writing, what the recruiters are writing, and what every department is going to have an expectation around, department head will have an expectation around, is their people will be using this technology and they will be using it to build in efficiencies, to make
Right.
themselves smarter, to make themselves faster. And so I think it's actually a graceful way to integrate AI without you candidly without making it a negative, almost dystopian dynamic of, oh, I'm getting rid of jobs or I'm getting rid of people and I'm replacing with agentics. It's like, no, let's talk about it in the way that it's actually enhancing. There's a positive dynamic to that. And it will absolutely, be led, out of the tech companies most likely because of the emphatic nature that they've had around, around the same. But this will spread very quickly across industries, and you will see the same thing start to happen in health and in finance and in retail, and others as well.
Great. Well, Dallas, it was great to catch up with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Happy holidays, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
Thank you very much.